Afternoon already at your place, right?
Yeah, already. Where are you now?
Yeah,
Brian?
I am based in the Netherlands, so I am between. Well, I'm an hour south from Amsterdam, so it's an hour earlier over here. It's almost noon, and I am I'm very delighted that I will be part of this amazing conference.
So am I. So am I. So, do you think we can hack a little bit some cameras now live? Because I can tell that I can see some people which are very excited, and some are, I don't know, they're doing something in the house. I don't know. So let's just focus everybody, right? Is this
Definitely.
possible? Have you done that before?
I haven't done that before, but from a theoretical
Just in
perspective,
between
it
me and
should be
you.
possible. We can try it, but I'm not sure if the Dutch authorities over here would allow me to. But if we don't tell them, maybe we can try it out.
Okay, let's discuss afterwards, maybe. Okay.
Definitely.
So Brian, welcome. Really pleased to have you here. I'll take the opportunity to thank one more time to our participants, to our speakers, to our partners, to the entire Codecamp team. So I would say that let the party begin. We're live from Iași, Romania, from the Codecamp live streaming studio. And by the way, I'm Florin. So Brian, how about you? What do you do for a living? What are your hobbies, passions?
I've got a lot to do now. I mean, staying at home, you develop some hobbies, but I am a developer advocate and engineer for Snyk, and Snyk is a security tooling company. We try to write tooling that can help you develop in a more secure way. And well, I'm a Java engineer for well, I think over 15 years or something. Been working in the industry for many different companies like big banks and insurance companies and government agencies. And yeah, what I've got a few hobbies. One of them is Taekwondo. I'm a Taekwondo master, and well, yeah, that's not possible now with social distancing. So unfortunately for me,
can you practice? Can you practice at home or?
yeah, I can practice at home. I have some equipment at home that I can. I can do target practicing over here and that kind of stuff. So that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. So Brian, what's all this fuzziness about JavaScript and Java? It's still a thing.
Yeah, I mean everybody is very keen on his or her own language, and I think that both Java and JavaScript do have their own place within the ecosystems. Although I think some languages are better for backend and some languages are better for front end. Let's keep it to that. And I will probably have some of this discussion because I have some JavaScript in here, just to make fun of it, basically. Because yeah, I'm a Java dude. That's why.
Okay, excellent. One more question, then I think we can kick it off. So, whose compiler compiled yours?
Sorry, again?
Whose compiler compiled yours? You know, that old joke, you know, the discussion between the C guys and the Java guys. And the Java guy said, well, we're stronger, we're better, we're object-oriented. Yeah, dude, but my compiler compiled yours.
Yeah, I mean, if you bootstrap it, it's a C compiler that compiled the first version of Java. But afterwards, I'm not so sure anymore.
Okay, let's see. So you've got the floor. Welcome again, and cheers, everybody. See you at the break.
Cool. So let me briefly share my, well, not briefly, I will share my screen so you will see my slide deck over here. And I have to zoom in to make sure that that bar is gone. And I will talk to you about Java web applications and breaking into that. But before I need to do that, before I'm going into the breaking part, and I promise you there will be some breaking part in both Java applications and a Node application, just to have a comparison. I want to talk to you about this word, DevSecOps. And the first time I saw this word, it sounded to me like, wow, that's another buzzword. Let's put machine learning and blockchain in it, and we have a bingo card full of it. But as I found out, although I do not like the word so much, I like the meaning of it. I mean, if you figure it out, we had DevOps, right? And we probably, a lot of developers try to do DevOps. Developer and operations, tearing down the wall between these two siloed parts within a company. And what we try to do is to make our agility better. We try to develop software better, faster, and stronger. Basically, what we do is not saying, okay, I'm done with developing and now it's your problem. We own the problem as a team. So if you, as your team, are responsible for developing, putting it into production, and when something goes wrong, you basically need to fix it, then you are doing DevOps, my friend. There is no strict rule of what is DevOps, but if you take responsibility for what you create and you need to fix it and it's not your problem anymore afterwards, or it's your problem afterwards, then you own it. You need to own what you create, and then you're doing DevOps. The only point with DevOps is we're so much focused on the dev and the ops part. So that means creating new stuff, new functions, new features, and how can we maintain it? How can we make it scalable? How can we make sure that after I'm gone, people can still read the code? So the scalability and maintainability are part of DevOps. However, security should be one of them as well. So I believe that DevSecOps should be the new mindset, and security should be in from the beginning. Because if you look at it, well, first let me introduce myself. I did a little bit. I'm Brian. I'm a developer advocate for Snyk. I do some work for the community. I'm a co-lead for the Utrecht JUG user group, and we had our meeting yesterday, which was a lot of fun. And I am also leading the virtual JUG together with a bunch of other great people, where we do a lot of conference kind of talks, sessions online. But let's get into the problem we want to solve with that DevSecOps part. We're trying to deliver software faster than we used to do. I mean, 10 years ago, when I was working for a government agency at that point, what we did was we released 3 times a year. And that was because, well, we needed severe testing, and that was just the way it went. But at this point, like look at e-commerce sector or something like that, we see that you might even release 3 times a day instead of 3 times a year. So we try to speed up these things because we want to have that feature out just a little bit earlier than our competitor. However, because we focus so much on the feature, that is the only thing we focus on, and not so much security. Because basically, in a normal DevOps team, we do not have so much focus on that, and we might not even have the knowledge to do that through your own life cycle. Actually, what we see is that in many companies, there is security expertise, only that security team is at the end of the line. Although we tried to, or we got rid of the wall between developers and operations, there's still a wall between us, the developer, operations, DevOps people, and the security. The security team works at a silo for multiple teams, and basically what they say in the end is no. What happens is you create something, worked on it for 3 weeks, as a sprint might work for 3 weeks or 4, whatever works in your case, and then you find out that they say no, because there might be an issue with this or that, and that causes friction. And that's something we need to prevent, and we already did that with developer and operations, but we also need to do that on a security level, because in the end, we do not want to be that company that released a bunch of customer data that is compromised now, and you are the next big headline in the news. Right? I mean, you probably think like, okay, that is fair, but how bad is that situation in reality? Is it actually that bad? Well, I can ask you all, have you ever heard of an American company called Equifax? And if you did, it's probably because of this. These are 3 headlines from the newspapers out of 2017. And if you heard of Equifax, it's probably because of this. And I can also ask you, like, have you heard of Equifax, say, 10 years ago? And if you're not based in the United States, you probably haven't. So you can say that's good marketing, right? Everybody knows your name. But the problem is, Equifax was in the news because of a bad thing. However, I will not blend into the company. I will go into the problem. The problem was, just like a bunch of other companies, they built their stuff on a framework, a Java framework. In this case, Apache Struts 2. They built their business logic on top of that, and they put it into production. At the point where that program went into production, it was perfectly fine. There was nothing going on. But over time, a security vulnerability was found in that underlying layer, in Apache Struts in this case. What happened is, if you don't know about these things, and you're in production and you're focused on new features and getting things out new, and not focusing what's already in production and already outward facing, just like happened here, and there is a vulnerability, people will go in. And while going in, and you're still not aware of that, people can snoop around. And they did that for a bunch of time, like weeks, maybe even months. At the end of the line, they gathered a lot of customer data, and over 143 million US customers were compromised. Their data was out in the open. And trust me, you do not want to be that next Equifax or that next big headline. Let me briefly go into that hack right away, just show you what happened, and I will actually try it out myself. So let me switch over to this screen. This is an application that works, that is on Heroku. And the application is not so much important because I do not need to go into that application. This application contains that old Struts version, that Struts 2.3, if I'm not mistaken. So what we need to do is, I'm going to my terminal, and you see something here, and I know it's small, so I will enlarge it for you. And what I can do with Struts, I can fire some request with CURL or curl to it. And if I fire a request by the browser or by curl or whatever, and I give it a certain content type, I can do some lovely things. So what I'm doing here is I am inserting a content type, and this is the value of that content type. And you can look at it and say, I have no clue what actually happens there. That is because the content type is not real. It's not a valid content type. It is a faulty, a wrong content type. It does not exist. What happens in this version of Apache Struts is that if the content type is non-existing, it will go into an exceptional flow. In the specific version, unfortunately, it is possible to utilize OGNL within that exceptional flow, only within that exceptional flow. And OGNL is the Object Graph Navigational Language, which is part of Apache Struts. And the OGNL language is an expression language. And with that expression language, you are allowed to interfere with the objects that are there. So you can get or set a certain value, change an object, or what you can do is you can create a new object. And that is actually what we do here. Let me just do it like this. So we actually have the whole thing in right? And what we do here is what you see is we create a new process builder. So we create a new object, the process builder, and we give that process builder the bash. And we feed that bash a certain command. That is interesting. So I literally spin up a new process with an arbitrary command. And if I have enough privileges, I can execute that command, right? Let's try that out for a second. So we are here. Let me just look at, I have it over here. Struts exploits. Yes, these are my notes. So what I can do, I can call the environment variables. Let's do that. So if I do it over here, what I say is I use that header I just showed you, and I just switch out the word command for the word env. And as you might know, in Linux or a Linux-based system, if you call env, you will get the environment variables. And I will curl it on, in this case, localhost. Let's not do localhost, but let's do that thing on Heroku. Just for a little bit more fun, because I can prep a lot of things on my local host, but let's do that on this Heroku machine. So by doing this, calling it out, I refer what I get into an output stream so I can show it to you. And what you see over here is that I have a bunch of the environment variables of that machine on Heroku. But if I can do the env command, I can also do a ls or a delete or a make file. The point is, I have a lot of power over here. I can do a bunch of commands without actually having access to a terminal. In this case, I'm showing the environment variables. And for instance, we can see what the Java home is, or well, what kind of ports are there configured, what the options are. But I can do a bunch more. So if I do the same command, and instead of env, let me do something like, you'll actually see what files are there in the root, which is amazing. So I can create files, delete files, call files, etc. What I just want you to remember is if I do this and I see the environment variables, I have the Java home. Hold that thought, hold that Java home. Keep that in mind because I need it later. Point is, with this hack, I am able to execute arbitrary code inside your server. And that's basically in a nutshell how the Apache Struts hack worked in the case of Equifax. Cool. So say this is the application you're building, and this is the application you are putting into production. This is the whole binary, your jar or war, or maybe if you use an older system, it may be an ear. But the binary, let's call it that. How much of that binary is actually your code? It's probably somewhere like this. This part is probably your code. This is the code you wrote. The rest are frameworks like Quarkus or Spring Boot or Micronaut or other libraries that you include, helped probably by your Maven or Gradle instance. So you build on top of a lot of dependencies, on a lot of frameworks and libraries. And these libraries pick in libraries and bring in more libraries and more libraries, and it goes several layers deep. So we do take a lot of passion and credit and love for our own code, like we do code reviews or pair programming so that our code is scalable and maintainable and all that kind of stuff. But how much do we care on that 90% that is yellow over here? How do you take care of that? Because that is the majority of your application. And how are you looking into that? Are you aware of what you put in? Are you taking the latest version? But even though if you're the latest version or not the latest version, do you know if there are any problems with that? Let's dive into that one. How big is that problem? I mean, I have an example over here, which is a Node.js application, just to make fun of Node, basically. It's 19 lines of serverless code. And these 19 lines have 2 direct dependencies. These 2 direct dependencies have underlying dependencies, so-called transitive dependencies. And it turns out that although it's Node.js, there are only 19 dependencies in my code in total. So 19 lines of code, 19 dependencies. Now I'm having the question, how much lines of code, just to have a metric, and I know it's not really representative, but just as a figure of thought, how much lines of the code will I pull into my binary that I put into production? It's just a little bit shy of 200,000 lines of code. So just 19 lines of code with the 2 dependencies generate a lot of code. And of course, not all that code is accessible nor executable, but a bunch of it is. And are you actually aware of what is accessible or what is executable or what can be loaded into memory? Probably you do not have that very clear or sharp on your mind. Okay, but that's Node.js. Let's go into a Spring serverless example we created, I think, just a little bit shy of a year ago. And it had 222 lines of code. Okay, fair enough. It had some duplication. It was not the best code I've ever written. Trust me, 222 lines of code. And it had 5 dependencies. And as you can see, some stuff from the Spring framework, Spring Cloud, Spring Data, some Jackson, which I think was there on purpose separately, and an Amazon AWS Java SDK. These 5 dependencies, pulling it into my Maven or Gradle file, bring in a lot of other dependencies. And within Java, that brought me to 54 dependencies in total. And now the question, how many lines of Java code did I actually put into production? It's over 450,000 lines of code for a 60,000 something. And it can be a little bit more or a little bit less if you do it with the frameworks that are current now. But just as a figure of speech, like, you know that it's less than 1% that you're actually coding yourself. A lot of it is stuff you pull in, maybe even blindly, from other people. And how much do you trust that? Because it's all about trust in the end. And again, some stuff will not be executed, but do you know? I mean, everything is there for Java, is there available on the class path. So potentially it can be loaded into memory. If I'm able to go in, and that's an if, but if that is the case, I can load all these classes and maybe we have a bunch of vulnerabilities. So think about that. That struts problem was also just a library. We're not aware of that it had a vulnerability. You know? Anyhow, open source usage has exploded, and that is good. I love it. I'm an open source maintainer myself. For instance, for Eclipse collections, I do a bunch of work. But open source usage has exploded, and that is good. But it's created by people like you and me, right? We might have some open source maintainers here as well. So the point is, we make mistakes, and for our own code, we have review stuff, and we might have stuff in place. The whole team can review it, but it's created by people. The dependencies we pull in is also created by people. And if that part is heavily used by a lot of applications, and say there is a vulnerability found, then we have potentially a lot of victims as well. So as we know that open source maintainers are quite effective and proud of their code, they might be fixing it as well, or there might be a newer version out. Think about that, like, do you upgrade to that newer version? Or if not, do you know what's actually going on? Because you do not want to be that next headliner again. If you look into packages, we see that the amount of packages has grown over the last couple of years, and this is that from January 2019, so over a year ago, and we see that the increasement of NPM was big, large, huge, but also the increasement of the amount of packages within Maven within a year was over 100,000. So there will be coming more and more packages because newer versions, etc. And if we see like the new vulnerabilities that were found each year by ecosystem, in this case, we see that in the Java ecosystem, as we take Maven Central as the benchmark, is the clear winner. If we look closely at the top 2 ecosystems, so let's pick Maven Central and NPM, you see that most of the vulnerabilities are not in the package you actually import, but in the underlying layers, because that package imports something else and imports something else, and you probably have, don't have a clue what it imports. But you're taking a starter or whatever big, large framework, and it imports a lot of other things. It depends on a lot of other things. Most of the problems are in these underlying layers, might be even 3, 4, or 5 layers deep. If we ask OS maintainers, open source maintainers, and we did that in a large questionnaire we called the state of open source security. If we ask them, how confident are you in your own security knowledge? 63% says, I'm kind of confident. However, most of the people writing code blindly trust the open source library that is there, even if it's not backed up by a large company, because we found it basically on Stack Overflow. Is that a good practice? And who is responsible for security? Most people say it's a shared responsibility between developers and security teams and operations, etc. But 81% believes that a developer should take their fair share, should take their responsibility, because as a developer, we know what we pick. We know how it works. We know what we're doing. We know what certain packages are capable of, or at least we should know. So if we build in security from the beginning, instead of building it and let it check by somebody else, it might be more effective and more secure. And we can go on and on. How did you find a vulnerability over time? 27% thinks they probably won't find it at all, which is scary. Hopefully that is not my bank. But this is interesting. Say you put something in production and it's been there for years. Like at the point that you put it into production, you might have scanned it or it was the newest version, it's perfectly fine. But over time, something will be discovered. A vulnerability will be discovered, especially in open source. How much time does it in general take for an open source package to have a vulnerability found and disclosed? Can take up to 2.5 years, and this is the median. So there's more, there's less, etc. But if you have something in production that is there for ages and you do not dare to touch it, and especially when it's outward facing, you might want to take a look at that, because over time, vulnerabilities will be found and exposed. And if you think about Docker, we have yet another layer to take care of, because if we have an application, you build it on top of a base image. Well, fun fact, we took the last couple of base images or the top 10 base images and scanned them for vulnerabilities. And we found out that the top 10 free base images from Docker all have vulnerabilities. Well, again, this was taking, I think, well, almost a year ago. But I did that node one last week, and it still has over almost 400 vulnerabilities. The point is, all these vulnerabilities can be, most of the time, can be traced back to the operating system layer. So if you are building Docker containers and you're taking the last node image in, that is based on top of a Debian image. So that means that if you build a Docker container and that's the stuff that goes into production, or that's the stuff you deliver, you have that operating system that also has a bunch of vulnerabilities for free. And in the end, as you are building it and delivering it, you are responsible for it. So also that operating system layer, if you're building images. So think about that. Do you need such a big image, or can you work with a smaller image or a smaller base image? Just as a best practice. So then we asked more like, okay, do you scan your operating system or your operating system layer for vulnerabilities? And 50% says, I don't know, I don't. And we can go on and on. But let's get into that hacking part I promised you. So let's get into some live thing. And we start with a node application. This is a node application that can do to-dos. I can do something like this, like buy flowers, which is fun because sometimes my wife gets a little bit annoyed by me, so I need to make up. Anyway, buy flowers. That's one thing I can do. And I can do a bunch of things, and I have a to-do list. The other thing I have here in the bottom, you might see it, I have an about link. And this is a static link to a static about page. And you see, again, I am one of the best UX designers because, hey, fair point, it is sizable, so it perfectly works on mobile. So, right? I mean, that's one of the UX principles, right? You need to make sure that it works on mobile the same way as it works on a desktop. It works. Now, but all things aside, this is a static page, and the static page is delivered to you with the ST library. And the ST library is a library in Node.js that can help you serve static content. Only this version has a vulnerability, a so-called path traversal vulnerability. Let me get into that. So let's go into another. Yes, this one. It's cool. Let me enlarge it so you can actually see what I'm typing. I think this will be large enough. Cool. So say I want to do that path traversal hack. Let's start with doing it from the browser because I want to make sure that I do not go into the browser because I want to make sure my browser doesn't interfere with it. So I want to have pure requests. So say I will curl this application or curl this HTML file. Let me copy paste it because I am lazy by nature. So if I curl that localhost 3001/public/about.html, I will get the about page. Fair and square, nothing going on. Now I want to do a path traversal. I want to break out of the public folder and even break out of the web server and get into the system folders. So maybe to the root of the system. So what you normally try, or what a hacker should try, is ... and see if I can traverse back into the path and break out of it. And if I do this a million times, I will definitely end up in the root, because if I do ... in the root, I will end up in the root anyway. So by doing this, I will see that I will get referred back to my homepage, which is cool. I mean, this is the application, this is the about page over here, and you see that in the top, you see that goof to do. Amazing. Because the ST library is a real library, and luckily it sees that I'm trying to do a ... However, it disallows specifically the ... So if I can figure out if that ... can do something differently, or I can be a little bit smarter, maybe I'm able to still do a path reversal. Well, long story short, let's do URL encoding. And URL encoding for a dot is %2e. Next time you interview a person, ask them if they know the URL encoding for a dot. If they do and they know it by heart, like immediately, this person might not be just your average developer, but also somebody who is or keen on security or just a amateur hacker. So if I do this and I do this a bunch of times, I will probably end up in the root of my system. Et voila. These are the folders in my root of my local system I'm working on now. So if I can go to something like this and ask for the passwd file on your etc in your etc folder. And I have a bunch of information. Okay, so with this vulnerability, I'm able to read files. That might not be very, very interesting, right? That might not be even considered a vulnerability by some people. But it is, because this is the start of a journey, and now I can read and I can see if you have some strange things over here, or maybe a property files that contains a X token, or you get me? Reading is the start of a journey. And if I can read in there, I can just start my investigation by looking into a bunch of your files and seeing if it is possible to get more information. For instance, if I just do this once, I just break out of the public folder, which I do not want, basically. But what I can do here, I can see app.js. So if I do app.js, which is the starting file of my Node application, I can just look into the source code. And I see there's a secret token over here. Wow. You get me? You shouldn't be storing secret tokens in program or in code at all. But you see that I can just interfere with all these things. Okay, more plausible sort of thing. Instead of going to the app.js, I can go to your package.json, which in this case is the equivalent of your Maven POM file. And I can see that these are the dependencies you have, like the ST library, which is vulnerable, but also the MS library. I know this version is vulnerable. And if not, I can just look at one-on-one and look at it and Google it and see if there is a known vulnerability for it. How much time do we have? We've got a bunch of time. That's good. That's good. So say the MS library is vulnerable. Let's dive into that one. That's interesting. There are a bunch of other things vulnerable, but let's go into this one. This is the last one to bash Node, because then I will go back into a Java application. But many people use both Java and Node.js. So let's go into this one. Say this is the application again. Let me ask you, how much do you like to write regular expressions? And a bunch of people probably do, right? But how much do you like it to debug other people's regular expressions? Well, as we say it, that's a pain in the butt in many cases. Just to read a regular expression, understand what the initial writer means with that, come on, that's difficult. Say we have a regular expression that looks somewhat like, I think it is plus, yes, somewhat like this. And ignore the dot. And if we want to compare that regular expression with this string, we know that it fits. Doesn't matter what the language is, it fits. And that's because, well, it just is. A regular expression are fast. Do we care? Do we care if it uses the plus or the star or the plus until halfway and then the star? Nah, not so much. If it's fast, it's good. However, what we know about a regular expression for certain, if it doesn't match, it go into a backtracking mode. And eventually, like in the worst case scenario, it tries every single possibility that is valid for that pattern to match it to that string. What if we can make a regular expression that is very, 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 very large, and we actually know that it does not match? So we know that it has to go through every single possibility available for that pattern. A node application works on one single thread, right? Think about it. There's only one thread to rule them all to do a node application. However, that's one of the reasons why you should use Java. That's multi-threaded. And then you do not have these kind of problems initially. Anyhow, let me show you what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to occupy that thread with a regular expression, which is fun because if I occupy that single thread, you are not able to access the application anymore. And we call that a denial of service. So we call this a regular expression denial of service, a RDoS instead of a DDoS. Let me try. So let me first show you what I'm going to do. I'm explaining to you. Say I will be doing this. I will be using this statement, that echo statement, to insert something into that form. And I will insert call mom in 20 minutes. And you will see it comes back. I'm using HTPy to do these requests. And if I do that, you will see it does something with the 20 and the minutes, and it will turn back into 20M. That is the regular expression part. That's how we're going to get in. So say I'm doing something like this. So instead of calling mom, I need to buy milk. But I will be buying milk in, and here comes the regular expression. I plot 60,000 fives and try to match that to minutes and fill that into that form. It works. It comes back quite fast, but also it took a little bit more time than the first one. It took a second more, or a fraction of a second more. So it plotted all the fives and it matched it to minutes. So it means that we actually can match it. And we know that a node application is quite fast. So what we see over here is what it does is 5 match to minutes will be converted into infinity days, which is fun. So I have a lot of time to do this. However, if I just make sure that it does not ever match, so instead of minutes is a valid string. So let's mistype it with a Z or with a Z, minutes. Then we know that it will never match. And if I execute this now, you will see it doesn't come back instantly. Going to my application and trying to bash it, as you can hear it, that thread is still occupied. So you're not able to do new commands. These commands will just pile up until that regular expression did every single possibility and it found out like there is no possibility, there is no match. It releases that thread again and all the other commands within my queue will just pile up over here. If I add just another 0 to this, you will find out that we will be waiting here for the rest of the day, which is not so much fun. Think about it. If you're running on a single instance, you will have a regular expression denial. If you're running on 2 instances, I just do this twice. However, if you want to run on the cloud and you have elastic scaling, it will pop up one instance and that's busy. So it pops up another and pops up another and pops up another. What do you think this does to your bill at the end of the month? It will exponentially raise amazingly because I just fired this application, or I fired this request 1,000,000 times. So that's not a denial of service, but a denial of your funds. Anyhow, just by introducing the wrong version of that library, because it is already fixed. But we're here for Java. And get back to the Java application on Heroku I showed you. I will briefly show you what it can do. And it's nothing much, but I will sign in over here and I will do, let's do a password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because I work at a security company and this is very, very safe. Don't ever do this at home. So I just signed up. No, don't push it into my vaults. Not interested. And what I can do, I can create to-dos, which is amazing because one of the things I can do over here is I can create a to-do like this. I'm using eat pie because it's over lunchtime here. I'm hungry, but I'm a little geeky, and I put in the pie sign, which is funny, right? Let's put it somewhere early 1970, 1st of February 1970, and give it a high priority because if it's over there, I might be hungry by now. So if I create this, what you see is that it transforms that pi sign into this character string, which is the ASCII representation of the pi sign. And within this application, when storing, it uses the native to ASCII binary, which is part of your JDK. And it changed that symbol into an ASCII representation, and that's what plotted over here. Why? I don't know, but it's fun. And I'm going to use that in my next hack, that native to ASCII part. Because what I'm able to do here as well is I can upload files. And I can upload zip files over here. And that's where it goes wrong. Because I'm going to upload a malicious zip file. And that's, well, I explain it later what's happening. So we know this Java home, right? We can see it here. Cool. What if my zip file looks something like this? What do we see here? We see a zip file I compiled. And that zip file contains a good.txt, which is an ordinary text file, and a second file called .. // etc., 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 /app /.jdk, which is the JDK instance of or the location of the JDK in my Heroku application, which I showed you with the environment variables just earlier, /bin /native to ASCII. So what I try to do is I'm trying to do a path traversal and override the native to ASCII binary with my own file. In this case, the file native to ASCII only consists echo muhaha gotcha, just a simple string. So what I'm trying to do is if I upload this file, let's see how that works. So choose file. Now I have to look it up. App. No, it's not an app, it's in demo. Demo Snyk Java goof. Exploits, and there is my zip/slip.zip. Amazing. So I try this zip/slip zip file I showed you with that path traversal thing, and I try to upload it. And what you see over here is that it unpacked because in my public folder now is that good.txt. So what happened to that .. /.. Well, or it blindly executed it and didn't recognize the .. or it might not. Let's figure out. So let's create a to-do now. And doesn't matter what I type in or what kind of data I put in or what kind of priority I put in, because the native to ASCII file, as you can see, is overwritten by this string. Muhaha, gotcha. And I can do that the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth time. But that native to ASCII file in my JDK is now overwritten by another binary. And why is that? Because I'm using a library to unzip. And in Java, there is no such real thing to unzip files. Well, we have the building blocks to do so, but there is no native library that can basically just unzip a file. So what we're doing is we're using these these building blocks. But as we see with the library I'm using here, which is called the ZT zip library, it doesn't very closely look at the path. It basically takes the path and creates a file with the same file name as in the zip file, concatenate the two, creates the file, and outputs the instance of the file in that file. So it basically takes the path, takes the file name, and without checking it, executes it. So a path reversal is possible. What it should be have been doing is look at the canonical path. Look at the path where it actually goes if you compare it to where you are. And if that is the path you want it to be, so if it's still in that, if it starts with the /public, then it makes sense. But if it's not, then you shouldn't be doing this. And you should ignore it and throw an exception, right? And the point here, the million-dollar question is, you're using this library, but did you know that these kind of things exist? Probably not, because that's not the way I imagine it in my mind. That is not the way. I wasn't even aware that you could create these kind of zip files, but you are. This thing is already fixed, and I can find out how. For instance, if I'm using the right tooling like a scanner, I could easily find out how. So say I'm using the scanner that my company provides, and I know this is a multi-layer application or a multi-POM application. So I want to scan all POM files individually and not as a whole. I want to know where the problem actually is. So I'm using the Snyk CLI over here, and I am testing all projects on my local machine. I can do it in many different ways, but as we can see in a second is what we do here is we take the dependency tree of your application per POM file, and we send it over to Snyk, and then you see what the issue might be. So what we can see here is, for instance, this is the last file over here. We can see there is a arbitrary file write in an archive extraction. It is in version 1.12, and it's fixed in 1.13. That is interesting. So by having this information, not only what is wrong, so you know what's going on, but also how to fix it, that's easy for me. What I can do now is I can go into the specific POM file. Oh, I should be. I think it's over here. Let's just look at the POM file. And you will see that if I scroll through it, a bunch of things, Apache Struts, cool, more dependencies. And I will see over here that I have this version 1.12, which my scanner just told me. And if I just update it to 1.13, this problem will be gone. But then I have to deploy it first to Heroku to show you exactly the same result. However, it means that if you have the right stuff in place, or you should at least be aware of what you are pulling in. Because think about it. Look at your Maven POM file tomorrow and see which of these versions are actually still being used. Or do you know for every version what kind of issues it has? And by importing the wrong version, things can happen. Things can happen that might not be that interesting, or not be that interesting for you. Anyhow, we started with that struts application, right? And people always say like, yeah, struts, it's old, that nobody uses anymore. Well, the point is that application was just an example to show you how Equifax got hacked. However, let me look if I can find my, yes. However, if we can see over here, we have a Spring application, a Spring Boot application, and I will make it bigger for you. And this Spring Boot application is not very, very interesting. Let me just show you what it does. It is a grocery list, and that grocery list put in a lot of groceries like beans, milk, bread, and sausage for a price. The items are not so important as well. If I look at the items, I enlarge them, you see that it contains an ID, which is auto-generated, a name and a cost, and a bunch of getters and setters. Fun, 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 fun. The important part is over here. This is my repository, and I am using Spring data, so I can extend the CRUD repository which are there. And now I have a bunch of stuff that is already generated will be generated for me by the use of the right name. For instance, find by name. I do not need to insert the SQL myself, which is good, which is a good thing because it also prevents, in this case, so in some way, a SQL injection. However, these are there for my convenience. I can do find by name, find all, and I can create a bunch of them. You probably know that if you are using Spring Data. What I'm doing as well is I'm using Spring Data REST. And what Spring Data REST does for me, by adding this annotation, it helps me create a REST endpoint. Basically, it transforms my CRUD repository into a REST repository, or into a bunch of REST endpoints with a certain default name, which is fun because now I do not have to care about that, and I can start working on the integration. So for prototyping, this is excellent. However, in this version of Spring Data REST, there is a problem, or else I will not be showing this, of course. Let me just run this, and hopefully the demo gods are with me, and it runs. Great. So I will show you my browser again, and let's go to, in this case, my localhost 8080. And it will redirect to a hell browser, which is another dependency I created and I pulled in just to show you a bunch of things. What I can show you here is if I call the endpoint item/1, which is basically there by default, it will show you the first item in my grocery list. And you will see over here that it shows me beans for 50 cents. I can do 2 and it will show you milk for $1.09. Great. What I can do as well, I can do something like search, find by name, and name is beer. You see that this was my CRUD thing, and now it transformed into a REST endpoint, if it works, of course. If I do this, you will see I found out that I have beer on my grocery list, which has a cost of $5.99. And I can do a bunch of things. I can create a find by name and cost and do it like that. Amazing. And this is how it should work. Perfect. So you think, hey, from a functional perspective, I write some tests. It works like it should be. If I do another name that's not there, it should not work. Perfect. But there's always a but. It is Spring Data REST. It's Spring framework, and Spring does a lot of things for you by default, which again is great. I am a Spring developer as well, or I develop with Spring as well. I'm not working for Spring. What we can do, and let me show you that over here. I can call this application inserting a certain body, and I will do this later on with a update request, a curl update request, and I will insert this body, and this body, whatever it looks like, it looks a bit weird, right? So let me make sure that you can actually see what's going on. This body is JSON. So I basically insert JSON as a body to this curl request I will do in a second. And again, this JSON looks a bit weird. But just like we had in struts, in Spring, we also have an expression language. The Spring expression language, SPEL. And basically, we some sort of duplicated the same way of attacking this application. Because what we do is with SPEL, we can also create new instances of a object. So what we do here is we get the runtime. And at runtime, we execute with an arbitrary command. And again, I will get the input stream routed to an output stream, and I will show you what's going on. So basically what I do is, again, I just spin up a new runtime, or I get to runtime and I execute a certain command. Basically more or less the same as we did with Apache Struts, but in a different way. Because what I can do now, just a second, it's not Struts, it's, where it is? Hot Spring REST exploits. Good. What I can do now, for instance, I can call the environment variables, let's just do this one. This one is better. Yes. So what you see over here is, if I just copy and paste this, I will do a curl patch with a content type JSON patch JSON, which is valid, but I give it this body, the body I just showed you, and instead of the command, I have again the environment variables over here. And where do I point it to? I point it to that item /1, and that's what I showed you is the first item in my grocery list. So what I can do here is I ask for the environment variables on a endpoint that is not meant to do this. And if I execute this one, you will see I will have the environment variables of my local machine, right? Which is amazing. Not, because I can do a bunch of other things. Like if I do this and again, let's do an ls, you can see the files that are there. If I do, instead of an ls, I can do a of course, it doesn't give anything back, but I created a file on this system while I don't have access to that. Let's do that ls again. And you will see that hello.txt is here. So I can create things. I can delete things. I can do a lot of things while I do not have access to that. And so although the Apache Struts vulnerability seems to be old and nobody is using struts anymore, it is also there with other frameworks that use expression languages, and you might be able to utilize it in a certain exceptional situation. Like in this case, when doing a curl patch request with a specific header at a specific time or at a specific endpoint that is there generated by a library. Again, by using the wrong version of the library or a version that was vulnerable that is already fixed. However, what you need to think of is, okay, this might seem silly. Who will get into that header? Who will recognize that header? Who will invent that header? And that's not even a point, because somebody invents it or somebody engineers it and somebody found out. And then at that point, it's out on the internet. And people can basically use it and write a script around it and try it on every single endpoint that is there on the internet. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, you hop on to the next one. And that's how people get breached, not by being specifically targeted, but to see if you're in the crossfire or not and using that specific vulnerable version of the library. Okay, enough hacking. Let's go to a concluding state. So we have that hacking part, but what is the solution? The solution is 3 parts. And it's culture, and I won't say, I wrote team culture, but you can make it broader as company culture. You need to think about process and you need to think about tooling, and these are all equally important. And I think you should start with culture, because culture is the way people think and people behave. Because if we think about culture, we work with a lot of different people with a lot of different mindsets. A developer in general wants to build things because we're good at it, and specifically wants to build on with a bunch of new frameworks. Fine, we're builders. But then we have security people. They actually do not care if it works or not. They just care about not getting breached. So that might already collide. We do not have the same focus. Operations people, they care about, can I maintain this easily? Can I put this into production? Can I scale it? What happens if they call me at 3 a.m. in the morning? Can I just push a button and it's there? There's a new pod that comes up and it works again. How do I maintain it? And then we have management. What do management people, like your upper level management or even your direct manager, what do they think of? Creating that new feature and eventually making money out of that. And that's for a good reason, because if you work for a commercial company, you should be profitable. However, if we think more in each other's lines and what do the other people care about and make that part of our habits, like for instance, if as a developer, I look into how can it easily be maintained. As a manager, they would give you time to clean up your technical debt or give you time to get educated about security. That would already help. And if you as a developer think about security from the beginning, instead of, I build it first and then I will see after security later. Yeah, that will have friction in the end. But if you think at it with a mindset of, oh, let's make sure we do not pull something in that is vulnerable, or let's make sure that we do not have any sort of code execution, arbitrary code execution from an external source, by thinking about it and reviewing it in the right perspective. If we play a bit better along and we care about each other's KPIs or point of views, then we already be a better team, and eventually we will make better software. And that is the hardest part. It sounds easy, but changing people is hard. And then comes process. We do not want to create new process. If I say to you, hey, you need to check off this list of 50 bullets for every deploy you want to do, you probably do it when I'm watching. But when I'm not watching, you will turn back to your old way of working. Or even though you find it important and you do it, it might be working for 2 weeks or 2 months. And after that, money takes over, or your management says, we need to push this one out very, very quickly. And you fall into your own habits. But what if we can adapt that process just a little, that you can still have that same way of working, but for instance, get automatically pinged when something is wrong, or automatically scanning when something is wrong, or integrate with your IDE, so it's not a big hassle that you do it on a command line. I'm a command line tool. I'm a command line tool guy, but some people like it better in their IDEs. Like if we have the process in step and it works with you instead of against you, then you might be able to adopt that. And hand in hand with that goes the tooling. Pick the tooling that works for you, works for your process. What I said, I'm a command line dude. I love to work on the terminal. But some people like to do the scanning more on inside their IDE. So why not choose a tool that works for your process, but helps you to get that to that point of being secure? So what we say, eventually you need to DevSecOps your pipeline. And then I mean your whole software development lifecycle. Coding on your local machine, scan there. When you bring in a new one, you bring in a new dependency, make sure it already contains known vulnerabilities. You should be doing that in your local system before you push it to your branch, or before you push to your repository. Why not connect your repository to a scanner that actively scans that on a daily basis? Because sometimes it gets pushed 3 times a day, sometimes it stays still for a few days. Or if you're comfortable with a certain level of vulnerabilities, why not scan every pull request to see if you not get worse? Which is a fair point. So by doing this in different stages, and in your CI pipeline, a lot of people already doing this, like as a gatekeeper, it cannot go to production if it contains a bunch of vulnerabilities. But you can scan your Docker image there as well. And you still need that, but it's not either or, it's both. If you do it in every single stage, then in your development lifecycle, you catch it often and early. And if you go to production, you're not done yet, because that's what we saw with that first Java hack I showed you. Why not, when you go to production, you have a certain version. Why not take a snapshot of that version? Because the dependencies and your code will not change. It will just live in production. Just make sure at that point you have a snapshot and you scan that on a daily basis. So in every single stage, you scan your stuff and you make sure that you are secure. What we say basically, and I want to conclude with this, is we need to shift security left. Start from your machine up to production and try to catch it as early as possible. But make sure that you also catch it over time. If you want to know more about how to secure your own code, we have a bunch of stuff on our blog posts. I will publish the sheets, of course, of the slides. And if there are any questions, feel free to ping me on Twitter. Just send the questions out now. And if you want to do that later, you can always ping me on Twitter with any specific questions on Snyk or security in general. Thank you for your attention.
Brian, thank you very, very much. Very insightful. And I must confess, a little bit scary as well, right? From your experience, what's the state of the industry? Are we developers well enough educated and prepared to write secure code on secure infrastructures and the like?
It's getting better. That's what it's not at the point I would love to be at, but it's getting better. People are getting more aware that these things are needed. The tools are there to help you with that. But it's also a thing, like, I feel that in school, in university, people learn how to code, but not how to think in a secure way. So these things are learned while doing the job, and it might already be too late if you are pushing it to production. And if your senior peers do not have that knowledge as well. So I see that there is a lot of attention for security, which is good, but it can always be better. And that's why we do these kind of talks, to see that if you know how to do it, specifically, it's quite easy. But you need to know what specific header is. But if you just Google around for a day, you find it out.
Right, right. I've got one specific question, or maybe two, about Docker images. Is Snyk able to work with Docker images? That's one. And the other one is with node libraries.
Yeah, we can scan Docker images for to see how the Docker image is built up. So for instance, what base image are you using? What key binaries are you using? And are there known vulnerabilities, for instance, for that base image? So we can scan that both on your local system and in your repository. But if you have an image and you scan that, if you download the CLI and you do, I think it was Docker container test and then the container image, it will scan your container and it sees like, oh, you're using a Debian Jessie full version. Maybe you should go into the slim version of this base image, and then you will already prevent to have 100 vulnerabilities. You will get 100 vulnerabilities left. So that's what we can do with Snyk. And we serve from an application perspective, we serve a bunch of ecosystems like NPM, Node.js, so NPM and Yarn, Java with Maven and Gradle. We can scan Scala and Kotlin. We can scan even .NET stuff, Python stuff. So we serve a variety of ecosystems as companies use specific languages for specific talks. So just one ecosystem will not basically be enough anymore these days.
All right, all right. One final question, because we're running out of time.
Sure.
Is Java better equipped than other languages or stacks in terms of the security threats?
I wouldn't specifically say yes. One thing that is good is, for instance, we have a type system and we are strongly typed for things like, so if we use the type system in a good way, we already have some sort of, how do you say that, security in there. If we know it needs to be a number and it's a string, then the compiler goes wrong. We have a compiling part. So at the compiler, we can already catch a bunch of stuff, which is not possible, for instance, in JavaScript. You probably find this out if you just write JavaScript for the front end. You find this out when it's in production or when a certain thing comes up. So I believe that a strongly typed system as Java, which need to be compiled already, has more abilities, but still it depends on the developer and how you use stuff. Because with every language you can do a bunch of nasty stuff and a bunch of insecure stuff, and it's more up to how you are using your languages and tools.
Got it. I'm very satisfied with the answer. Okay.
Cool.
So Brian, thank you so much for being with us, and we're looking forward for the next, I don't know, Codecamp live and then in-person sessions. Hope
Cool.
one day you'll join us in Romania, in Iași, Cluj, Timișoara, and Bucharest. Until then, have a nice day. Thanks again.